Today, it's my pleasure to have conversation with very interesting person. He was born in England and he has been living and working in Finland since 1981. He has been training English communication skills for Finnish professionals both in private and public sector. He has been quality inspector, mentor and moderator in education in England. He worked 10 years in Häme University of Applied Sciences, HAMC in short, teaching English communication skills both for bachelor students and university staff, and teaching VET courses, that is vocational education and training courses in HAMC's international programs, for example, in Brazil, Kazakhstan, and Kenya. He retired from HAMC in 2016. He still continues training personnel and teachers in communication skills and teaching skills, having a company of his own. Brian Joyce, welcome to LTC studio.
Thank you, Jori. I'm very happy to be here.
First, could you give me an answer to a quite difficult question? Who are you? How would you define yourself as a person and professional?
Yes, well, it is very difficult, and I don't think I can fully answer that. But I can say that I'm a product of my mother and father, who were working class. My father served in the Second World War and had certain values at that time as a carpenter. He was a very hard worker. My mother finished school at 15 and worked in catering. So I was able to observe what hard work really was. I was able to observe what not having enough money meant. They moved around United Kingdom a lot. So in a sense, I was quite lonely because I never established a network of friends. But this really set me up for becoming a so-called gypsy of the world and able to confront diversity and differences wherever I went. I had a kind of a defensive tool to protect myself in new environments. And I think I managed that quite well. I didn't know this at the time, but on reflection, I realized that I was shaped very strongly by my mother and father's environment and circumstances.
You told me once that there were key moments in your youth that molded your thinking. Would you like to tell me more about that?
Yes, I remember telling you, and it was at one point a few years ago, I was looking back at my life and I realized that these key moments were like crossroads with illuminated signs. I told you earlier that my mother and father were struggling a little bit financially and so on, and they were looking for jobs. So they moved back to Scotland. My mother's from Scotland, and my father's naval base was in Arbroath in Scotland. So when I was 1 year old, we moved up to Scotland, and my first year at school was in a Scottish school. The key moment was walking home from school, and I looked down a long driveway, and I saw this large building, and it was a high school. And I remember the vision, and I remember the feeling. I want to go there. I want to be a part of that learning process. And it was almost like a seed that I had collected. And then further on, without knowing it, it started to grow. Later on, my mother and father lost their home because there was a depression, you say in Finnish, lama, in Scotland. So they had to move back to England. So by the time I was 6, 7 years old, we went back to England, and I'd already lived in 5 homes. This was a part of my loneliness. So at 6, there was this vision. And then I had appendicitis. I had to go to hospital to have my appendix out when I was 11 years old. Now, 11 is a very important age in the education system in England. Well, at that time, we had an exam called the 11 plus, which meant after junior school, you took an exam. If you passed, you went to the academic grammar school, which was the route to university. If you failed, you went to a secondary modern school, and you ended up in maybe going to a technical school. I failed that exam because I was in hospital just before the exam, so I missed out training, schooling. I failed that exam by 1 point. My mother went to ask why I'd failed, and they said, sorry, you failed by 1 point. That meant I went to secondary modern school at the age of 11, 12. While I was there, I was in Roman Catholic school, infant, junior, and secondary. In this secondary school, it's called John Fisher, a priest came to give a talk to all of us about the vocation of being a priest. And I was 11, 12 years old. And I found what he was saying magical. I was inspired. Again, I had that feeling of need and vocation. So when I went home, maybe I made the mistake of saying to my mother, who's Catholic, my father is not, I think, Mum, I want to be a priest. Well, unknown to me, she then contacted the parish priest, and the wheels started rolling. And before I knew it, the parish priest came to our house and started talking about me going to a boarding school for priesthood training. I was caught on the conveyor belt of my mother's dreams, because she finished, as I said, she finished school at 15, and she wanted the best for her children. She sacrificed and sacrificed so that we could have an education. That's why she was very disappointed that I had failed the 11 plus exam. Anyway, to cut that story short, I got into St. Bernardine's College, or Franciscan school, run by Franciscans. And I went when I was 12. I took a test, and my academic training was poor. So I had to go back 1 year and start at the beginning. Even though I had completed year 1 of secondary, I had to do, so I was 1 year older than the others, which was a bit shameful. I didn't want to say how old I was, because it included academic studies and Latin and so on. So I was in a boarding school, again, lonely. I left home. I only had 6 weeks in Peterborough, where I lived at home. The rest was in a boarding school of 100 boys and 12 Franciscan teachers. They were all Franciscan teachers who had been trained at Cambridge University. So they were not learner-centered. They were, let's say, very knowledgeable and subject-centered. So I have to say that the lessons were full of knowledge and fact and memory-based and totally boring. But it pushed me up to a level I would never have reached at secondary school. So that moment of attending in secondary school, that priest who talked about joining the priesthood, was another moment of enlightenment, and it took me on another path. Then at the end, when I reached sixth form, I was 19 or 20, I began to realize that to become a Catholic priest, you had to follow the rule of celibacy, which meant you couldn't marry, you couldn't have children. I also noticed at that time that there was something going wrong at school. And if you've ever seen the movie The Post, you will realize that at that time, Catholic schools and Catholic priests, there were examples of paedophilia. And I actually witnessed this, and I was a part of it, but not in a very big way. And I made my mind up that I could not be a priest in this kind of environment. So what could I do? The big question. I found myself a girlfriend locally, and someone found out I had a girlfriend. So I went to the headmaster and he said, Brian, we are going to kick you out, but we have reconsidered because you only have one more year here to take your final exams for university or college, so you can stay. Okay. And you have to remember, my parents were poor, so the bishop was paying for my education. So luckily I stayed one more year, and I was thinking, well, I have this desire to do good. What's the next best thing? And I had a lot of Bible training, and I knew that in the Christian world, Jesus was a teacher. So I thought, well, if I can't be a priest, I can be a teacher. So the values that I'd picked up in my priesthood training carried through into teaching. So I kind of saw my teaching as being a priest, doing good. So I got accepted into St. Mary's University in Twickenham, which is a Roman Catholic university, and trained to be a teacher. So those 3 times, seeing the school when I was 6, meeting the priest who was talking about becoming a priest when I was 11, and then having this experience of not wanting to be a priest because of certain experiences at 19, led me into the teaching profession. That's it in a nutshell.